Welcome to the inheritance and composition lesson here. My name is Ryan and I am a computer science teacher. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through this demonstration here of some simple inheritance and some simple composition with these different classes I created that are going to verbally create an animal. We're not going to draw an animal using the applet or anything like that, just because I don't want to get into the business of worrying about XY coordinates, because it can get pretty complicated with just trying to draw in general. What I'd rather do is just us use our imagination and to verbally draw an animal. So our first test class, the test class right here is going to be called Animal Laboratory. And all of the classes that are called Animal Laboratory will be our test classes. We'll have 4 of them in this video. Then you'll create your own once you get to the assignment. And the Animal Laboratory will run the different demonstrations of composition and inheritance. Okay, so when we run the first one, Animal Laboratory, you know, before I go any further, let me quickly explain something. Here's how I'm going to run the videos. Sometimes I have it set up where I type up the instructions, and other times I have it set up where I'll put everything on the screen at one time. In this case, I'll put everything on the screen at one time, and what you should do is pause the video, type everything up as you see it, and then if you want, you can go back and listen to the explanation as to what's taking place with each of the different parts. However, don't get into a bad habit of just running through this video or any of the other videos you see online where you just pause it, get all the information, and keep going and not listening to what the person is telling you on the instructions, because getting the instruction is where you are going to put all the information together to be able to go out and do something with it. Okay, so our Animal Laboratory, when we run this class, it's going to give some information here. Let me move this up so we can see everything. Okay, so first thing it's going to do is it's going to create these different objects, and then it'll have this output down here at the bottom in the console. If you're not using JGrasp, you might figure out where all your console output will be taking place in your particular Java IDE. In mine, it's going to be down here at the bottom. If you don't use JGrasp, which I recommend you do, it's pretty lean and mean, but you might want to go check that out. So anyhow, let's quickly walk through and see what's going on here. In our Animal Laboratory file, it's going to use the main method here, and it's going to create 3 different objects from the VerbalEars class. And we're using 3 different constructors for VerbalEars. So this isn't really inheritance or composition. However, I just want to give a quick reminder on using constructors for creating objects. So we have 3 different constructors for VerbalEars, and let's go look at the VerbalEars class. And one thing I've done with this, let me resize my window here, is I put the VerbalEars class embedded into the same file as Animal Laboratory. And if you subscribe to my channel, you can get copies of all these files, so you can go check them out. So VerbalEars class is embedded within Animal Laboratory. And what VerbalEars does is it takes a public string with response 1 that has an integer, which is private, called ear count. One's public, one's private. Is there a strategy here? Not really. What I've done is I just wanted you to see the different abilities that you have with these classes, that you can have a public and a private. Also, one other thing you should note here. In front of VerbalEars, we don't have the word public, okay? We don't have to have public because since it is in the same file and this one has been declared public, that means any of the different Java files inside of our directory over here can access this particular class. It's not a good strategy. It's actually kind of a bad habit. However, some people, for spacing purposes, do this, and there's nothing wrong with it. So if you want to do that, you're more than welcome to. Okay, so let's quickly walk through. Again, I just created a string variable that's public and a private integer called ear count that's going to be private. No major strategy here. I just wanted to show you that we could put a public and a private here in this class. Next, we have our first constructor, public VerbalEars. Okay, this is the default constructor. So up here, when we create this object, myEars1, then over here on line 12, we print out our first object, which is myEars1.getEars. This one right here is going to have the string value small ears assigned to response 1, and then the default value 2 assigned to ear counts. And down here on the method getEars, okay, it's returning a string. We're just going to take this string literal and concatenate here with the response. And then we'll have some more string literal, and then we'll concatenate it with the integer value. So it prints out a sentence like the one you see down here below, where it says first ear entry, this animal has small ears and a total of 2 ears. Okay, that's all that's taking place there. Nothing super complex. Then our next constructor, it takes one parameter, which is a string value. And you come over here to VerbalEars. You'll notice that line 41 is where we have our constructor that takes one string parameter. And we take that value and assign it to response 1, and then ear count, since it didn't have a parameter passed, it gets a default value too. We could technically put anything here that we wanted to. You could put 200, 2000, it doesn't really matter. Up here on line 13, we go ahead and we print out myears2.getEars, and it's going to print out the value right here, just like it did on the first myears. And last but not least, we have our third constructor for myears3. And this one has 2 parameters passed through it, the string and the integer. And it's going to come this happy little camper down here on line 47. That constructor takes these values, and we pass name into response 1. And check this out. We went ahead and created a local variable called ear count that gets passed through the parameter. It has the same name as this ear count right up here, okay? And we need to take this value that's getting passed to it through the parameter, which came from the test class right up here, that number 3. Okay, we need to pass that value 3 to this variable right here. And we do that by saying this dot ear count. When we say this dot ear count, it's talking about the instance variable for that particular class, which in this case is right up here. Okay, so this dot ear count is basically assigning the value that comes from this ear count to this ear count right here. And we can access that by saying this dot ear count. If we didn't put this dot ear count, that means we would take this ear count and assign it back to this, or to the same value, okay? This is called your scope of your variables here. And we need to put this dot so that way the computer knows that we're talking about this variable right here. Okay? It seems kind of crazy, but once you do it a few thousand times, it'll be clear as mud. And that, I believe, wraps up all of our VerbalEars. Okay? And again, right here on lines 12 through 14, this is where we print out the return string values that come from the getEars method inside the VerbalEars class. Next, we're going to move down to the VerbalNose class. So we're going to create these objects from VerbalNose. Let's go ahead and look at that script. If you're new to JGrasp over here on the left-hand side, very similar to a lot of other IDEs out there for Java, they'll have a list of all the different files you happen to be working with in this project or in this folder. So to get that information shown on your screen, you click on the B right over here, which stands for Browse. Or boy! Anyhow, VerbalNose, where are you? So here is my Java file called VerbalNose. And let's take a quick look at this. It's a public class. I have to put it as public because it's not embedded within the same file as Animal Laboratory over here. We're going to have a private string. We're going to call it response1. And you know what? Have you noticed that I'm using the same variable name? Okay, I'm keeping the name the same just so it's easy for me to remember. And if you're pretty experienced in programming, you might be thinking of an easier way I can do all this, and we'll touch on that in a few videos from now. So our first constructor takes no parameters, and we just automatically assign a value to response1. We'll just say the nose will be described as a long nose. Our second constructor for VerbalNose will take one string parameter, and we'll take that value and assign it to response1. And then down here we have a get method, which is going to return the value response1, which is string, and it'll return it back to the object that calls that method. Let's go back over here to Animal Laboratory. So we create VerbalNose from nose1, and then over here we have another object, myNose2, which will take that one parameter that we're passing to it. Remember, default, nothing passed. Right here, we're passing some information to it. And down here, we're going to print out. If you forgot what that means, you might want to look it up on Google, but I'll give you a hint. It's the same as typing in print line. It's just going to do a carriage return down to the bottom. It's kind of an escape character. And over here, we're concatenating MyNose1 with the getNose method. And you can see down here on our output, it says, do we have a nose? We have a long nose. And then down here on line 20, for MyNose2, it's just showing us that we're passing this value in. And it says, how do I know where to go? Just follow your nose. Well, not just, but follow your nose. And we're just passing the information. Okay, so that's all this class right here shows you. Creating some constructors and getting some other objects created from different classes. This really has nothing to do with composition and inheritance, at least not yet. Let's move on to our next test lab. I just opened up the Animal Laboratory 2 test class here, and we're going to run this class and see what our output is here. And what we're doing here is we're going to actually start creating an animal object, and this animal object will start using composition. It's going to pull in information it's going to pull in objects from other classes. That way we can start building our animal object. All right, and let's go ahead and run this and see what the results are. So we run the file and we got, let's see, let me clear that and run it again. Okay, so we should have 4 different outputs. One, we got this strange output. Now I'll explain what's going on with this. This is actually a wrong way to print an object, or it could be the right way if that's what you're looking for, which is an address. I'll explain that in a second. Second, our output here shows you the correct way. This will be coming from these objects right over here, which is MyAnimalUno. Then down here, again, we show you the wrong way to print something out, and again, we show you the right way. Okay, nothing super complex. Before we go through and explain this, let me talk a little bit about inheritance and composition. I made this quick little PowerPoint slide right here. Now let me pull it up so you can check it out. So inheritance is when you have a class, say a superclass. In our case, it's going to be the class called animal. And I'll pause the video, or hold on, I'll show you the code for animal here in a second. All right, so inheritance means that we have our superclass named animal, and then it's going to have subclasses. These subclasses are going to inherit the characteristics of its superclass or its parent class. Okay, so our subclass of animal is going to be carnivore. Okay, then the subclass of carnivore, I just made this up, we're going to say it's spacemonster. Okay, so spacemonster is going to inherit characteristics of a carnivore, and carnivore is going to inherit characteristics of the animal superclass. Now over here I started another branch, and I'm not going to show this to you, and you'll see why when we get to the end of this little video session, that we started creating another subclass called herbivore. Okay, and I labeled these as subclass 1 because they're the first level of the subclass. Down here, if we had another subclass, this would be subclass 2, which means it's on the second level below your superclass. Now these subclasses are defined as a is-a relationship, because a carnivore is an animal, or is a animal by this terminology. A space monster is a carnivore. Now I know some of you are thinking like, well, how do we know if this space monster is a carnivore? It could be a plant eater. Okay, well, we're going to just infer that the space monster in my labs is a carnivore and eats meat. Okay, so the space monster is a carnivore. Carnivore is a animal. Okay, now however, an animal is not a carnivore. Okay, because an animal could be a carnivore or an herbivore, or technically it could be all sorts of other categories such as omnivore, scavenger, decomposer and stuff. Okay, but we're not going to get into biology here. Instead, we're just going to focus that the subclasses has a is-a relationship. So it is a member of its parent or its superclass. Okay, so the superclass to space monster is carnivore and animal. The superclass to carnivore is just animal. Okay, the subclass to carnivore is spacemonster. Animal has technically, in this example, 3 subclasses. It has carnivore, herbivore, and finally spacemonster. Okay, and here's the kind of food for thought. No pun intended with the food chain here stuff, but all the information can flow downward. So anything an animal can come down to carnivore and spacemonster. However, you'll notice these arrows are not double-sided arrows. These are pointing in one direction. The information from spacemonster can't get pushed back up to animal. Okay, so you have to infer that spacemonster can pull information down from animal to it, whereas animal cannot pull information up from spacemonster to itself. This will make more sense once we create some pretty complex code. Next, we have composition. Composition is a little bit different. I took the same example from before, except I removed the herbivore. It would still hold true for this example, but I didn't have enough room to put everything out here, and that looks kind of sloppy when I look at it. But anyhow, so composition is when a class can receive information from other classes. For example, we have an appendages class, and an animal, a carnivore or a space monster, no matter what it is, in our scenario here, it can pull information from the appendages. Okay, and same thing for nose and ears. So these 3 classes right here, and lots of other ones if you wanted to, they can supply class objects for animal, carnivore, or space monster. All 3 of them. They can supply information to any of those right there. Now, however, these are not part of animal. Okay, an animal has an appendage or nose or ears. Okay, but appendages don't have animals. Appendages don't have carnivores. Appendages don't have space monsters. Okay, and the same thing with the nose. The nose does not have a carnivore, a nose does not have a space monster, and a nose does not have an animal. Okay, composition are the parts that make up the object. So the animal object will be made up of all these different parts, which are objects themselves. Again, notice the arrows, they're only pointing in one direction. They're not pointing in multiple directions. So that means the information flows to these, okay, because it's going to be a part of that. This is known as a has a relationship, because the animal has a appendage, nose, or ear, but the nose does not have an animal, and so forth. All right, first thing we're going to do now is we're going to create the animal object like we have here on line 12. Before we do that, we actually have to create the different parts that will create the animal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you each one of these different classes right here as we go through and create this. Now, some of you might want to pause the video and copy all this down. That's fine. I'm going to come back through and explain this here in a second. So if you don't pause the copy, don't worry. We're going to come right back to this. We're going to first go to VerbalEars. If I remember correctly, VerbalEars, which I can look over here, I see it's a dot class. And I forgot where I put it, but I see a dot class. I don't see a dot Java. That reminds me, I put it in the animal laboratory. See why we don't embed our classes in our other files here. So there's VerbalEars. We just saw these constructors, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of keep that in the back of my mind as I go through animal laboratory. And I'll leave this other one up just in case we need it. So we're going to create this object for VerbalEars. It's going to pass in the 2 parameters like you saw before in the previous animal laboratory example. Next, we're going to have VerbalNose, and I believe we already covered VerbalNose. So if you haven't copied that down, you should. And if I was you, I'd be following along with these videos. It's important. It may seem simplistic that you're just copying, but you'll be shocked that you'll actually create typos and errors, and that's a great way to figure out how to program, by making mistakes. Next, verbal appendages. Okay, this verbal appendages constructor is going to pass in 2 values. Let's go ahead and pull that one up. Here's the .java file, and here's my verbal appendages. So this should be the whole thing, and there we go. This looks good. So verbal appendages, we're passing in a string response 1, then we have an integer lay count. Then down here we have our first constructor. It has nothing inside of it, so we just put in some default information. And we just write in the term default legs for response 1. Leg count, it's going to have a count of 4. Next, down here for verbal appendages, the second constructor on line 13 through 17, it's going to pass in a string value. We assign the value to response 1, just like you've seen before. Then over here on line 19 is the third constructor. We pass in an integer and string value. We use the this dot methodology to pass the value into that instance variable right here. And last but not least, we have our get method that's going to return a string value with some string literals concatenated with our variables right here. Okay, so when we call this get appendages in our test lab or test class, it's going to return this information so we can print it out on the console and be amazed at our work. So go ahead and copy that down and make sure it compiles by clicking on the compile button. If you click on run, you'll see a message like this. It says there's no main methods or Java FX applications and applets and doobie. So what it really means is there's nothing that's really running this, okay? It compiles, your code's good, but there's nothing to tell it to run. And we need a main method in our situation to make it run. Next, down here, oh, wait a minute, we just explained that one. Right here we got my color, which comes from the verbal color class. Let's find that, verbalcolor.java. And please open, there we go. So verbal color right here, nothing super complex. I'm trying to keep it nice and simple just by passing in strings and passing in some integers. You technically could use doubles, floats, booleans, and all sorts of fun stuff. So we're just passing in those values. Here's the default constructor. Nothing fancy, same concept as before with the other constructors. In this case I only put 2, and then down here we're just returning the string value with the variables concatenated to these string literals, so that way we have a nice output that we can identify as our color class right here, verbal color. Hey, just to warn you, if you would have put something like public class color, this would potentially cause issues because there's actually a color class out there. So there's a good reason why I put verbal color. And just go ahead and compile it, make sure everything's correct. And remember, if you click on run, you'll get this message. And if it shows up, that's good. That means it works, okay? Next, let's go back and verbal name, which is going to be the class right here on line 10 for the object called my name. And let's go ahead and get verbal name. There you are. And verbal name is pretty simple as well. We do the same thing for our default constructor. I put my name, you can put your name or your friend's name or a friend of a friend or a family member. Over here on 13 to 17, we'll pass in this value to response 1, and again we're returning a value out. Okay? Nothing super fancy or complex. We just want to build this out because here's where we get interesting. We're going to build out an animal class. Okay? And the animal class in this particular constructor is going to take in 5 parameters, and each one of those parameters will be an object, which will be these objects right here. And we're passing them into this new animal object called myAnimalUno. With me? Let's go ahead and open up our animal class. This one will be a little bit longer than the other ones. Nothing super complex. So public class animal. I'm going to push my console down so you can see it more. So right here we create 5 protected variables. And protected, if you're not sure what that means, I would look it up on Google. But essentially what it does is it limits the accessibility of these variables on being able to change them, manipulate them to just members of these, the family of these classes, or the, packages that they happen to be in. You'll notice that these 5 variables that we create right here are from the 5 classes I just briefly described here in this, last few minutes of this video. Next, we have our first constructor for animal, and here in this constructor, we're actually going to assign values to these class objects we just created up here on lines 4 through 8. We're going to call in the constructors of each of these different classes. If you forgot what these do or done or whatever I'm trying to say, did, okay, go back to those other explanations of these classes so you can see how I pass in the parameters to these new objects through the constructors right here. Down here on lines 19 through 20, well, it should be 28. Let me move that up a little bit. Okay, so lines 19 through 27, this is the second constructor for animal. And this one, it's not default. Right up here, this was default because it has nothing inside of it. So if we just create animal with no parameters passed, this is what we get. We get default, 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 some generic numbers, nothing fancy. Here with public animal, we're going to be able to pass in the values, okay? We'll pass them in with these parameters set up right here. And you can see the variable names. I try to use a convention where I use the first initial as a lowercase and then the second word as a capital letter, okay? Just attempting to keep a convention. I could have easily, for ears, which I called anim ears, that's short for animal ears. I should just type the animal, but I got really lazy with typing the A and the L out after the M right here. So I could have easily typed in this as, you know, VE if I wanted to. It really wouldn't make a difference, okay? But I'm going to keep it the same because I already have done that. And then down here you can just see where I assign the values to these. Over here we have our public string. This is get animal information the wrong way. Okay, so this is the wrong way to try to return a string value with these. Remember when I talked about the weird addresses that were showing up? Okay, I say this is the wrong way because we're trying to return string, a string value that has concatenated information, that's pulling information out of these particular class objects. Okay, this is going to return addresses. It's going to get the address in the memory of the anim name object, and same with the ears and nose and the appendage and the color. It's going to get those addresses and return those addresses into the console. It's the kind of, it looks like the email address if I scroll up. And where to go? I promise it's in there somewhere. You'll see in a second. Okay. So anyhow, that's going to return the address. Down here I have another get method which is returning a string, but it's returning it the proper way. And it's returning it the proper way by calling the get method from each of these different classes. Okay? You would think you would just be able to print by calling the class object, but it doesn't. It actually prints the address. Here's the proper way. It's worth typing up to see it the right and wrong way just to get that memory or that physiological memory built into your mind of what's going on with these type of you know, get methods right here. So let's go back to the Animal Laboratory 2 and really check out what we got going on here. So our first animal uno is Espanol for 1, and we're going to pass in these 5 objects that we're creating right up here inside of lines 6 through 10. So we'll pass in those parameters to animal uno, and then right here we print out my animal uno dot get animal info the wrong way. Let's run this so you can see the wrong way, which is right here. Okay, so those are the memory addresses for those objects. And then I put a couple print lines in to separate it. And then down here on 17, we say get it the right way. And you can see here is the correct way. It passes in those default values. Now you'll notice the name is Ryan, okay, that's because verbal name came in as the default value. And that is pretty much it. Oh, I forgot. We got animal dose down here. Okay, animal dose does something very similar, except with animal dose, I just call the generic constructor for animal. So animal dose does the same thing on its output right here. You can see each one of these objects has a different memory value, okay? For example, verbal name is at 33909752, which everybody knows about that address, right? So if you look up here, the other verbal name has a totally different memory address because those objects are in 2 separate locations, even though they're kind of coming from the same they're coming from the same object class that's creating these objects right here, my animal and my animal dose. Okay, so totally different memory addresses. Worth noting. This will come in handy when you get into super complex stuff. And then down right here, we print out my animal dose, get animal the right way, and you can see it prints out the information here as so. Okay, so experiment with this, and that is pretty much Animal Laboratory 2. I'll expand it in case you want to pause it, type it up, and get some more exposure with this. Next, we're going to move on to Animal Laboratory 3. Animal Laboratory 3 is where we get involved with our inheritance. We're going to create a class called SubAnimal, and let me go ahead and pull that up for you. SubAnimal, and here's SubAnimal. It's public class SubAnimal extends animal. So the word extends, that is your word that's going to mean that it inherits from. So SubAnimal inherits from animal. That's what that whole sentence says. Kind of makes you wonder why they didn't just write the word inherits instead of extends. You know, that's, if I invented language, I'll make that word inherits. That's a big promise right there. So SubAnimal extends, or AKA inherits from animal. Let's go back to our Animal Laboratory. And if you don't mind, I'm going to actually clean up my IDE here. I don't need these classes anymore. We already created those. I'm going to get rid of Animal Laboratory 2. Not getting rid of, just closing them out so I have a little bit more room. Let's close color. Let's close verbal name. And let's leave animal up and SubAnimal. So SubAnimal extends animal. Now, what does that mean? So right here's animal. It's extending animal. But this doesn't say anything about SubAnimal. It doesn't have to. Because if you remember your hierarchy, right here, if we pull this up, animal will allow its subclasses to inherit everything below it. So our class SubAnimal, it's inheriting all of this stuff from animal. Okay? So SubAnimal, it has a big inheritance coming to it from the animal class. It's going to get ears, nose, appendages, colors, names. I mean, it's going to be really awesome for the SubAnimal here. Let's check out what happens. So my SubAnimal 1, we use the default constructor for SubAnimal. You'll notice we don't have one. So what? That's crazy. But will this even work without it? Let me find out. Oh my gosh, it does. Okay, how in the world can that work with, right here's the output. Okay, so how in the world can that work without a constructor? I thought we had to have constructors for everything. Okay, remember I said SubAnimal inherits from animal. So since it inherits from animal, it inherits this public animal constructor as well right here. Okay, so that SubAnimal's pretty stinking lucky if you ask me, because now it can use the inherited constructor for animal. And you can see this right here. We print it out. Print out line, my SubAnimal 1, get animal the right way. And you'll notice the results. It's all the default information right here. Okay, that's exactly what the animal constructor would print out based upon right up here. It's all the default information. Okay, if you don't believe me, go check it out and see for yourself. Okay, so SubAnimal inherits all those characteristics. Now that's not very exciting, so we don't really need to elaborate on that. And that's called a super call. We could have technically come over here and have done public SubAnimal, put in parentheses. We could have done this and hit save and come over here to Animal Laboratory. You'll notice it's calling the constructor SubAnimal. Make sure I spelled that right. I didn't put anything weird in here. Okay, so I should be able to compile it. No issues there. That should come over here to Animal Laboratory 3, and hopefully I'll get the same results. Unless there's something I'm forgetting about, because I'm drinking a lot of coffee, and talking and drinking coffee and trying to program is a dangerous combination. Okay, and there you go. You see the defaults right there. Okay, and here's something else we could have done. Experiment with this, y'all. We could come over here and type in the word super. Not because it's super cool, because it is a super class. So the word super is calling the super class default constructor. Okay, so SubAnimal calls the super class default constructor, which is this one right here. Now you'll notice it did it anyways when I didn't even have that. So let me compile it. Then let's come over here to Animal Laboratory 3, and let's go ahead and run that. and you'll notice it does the default as well. Okay, what's going on here? Well, Java's pretty smart. Java, whether you put super or not, it calls super. Okay, if you don't put anything, it automatically calls the super. Okay, so Java automatically does all this stuff for you. Now, whoops, I clicked on right. Okay, so this really doesn't do anything and doesn't serve a purpose other than just to show you that the subclass calls its superclass. Okay, so this subclass inherited those characteristics. All right, now notice this subclass was pulling information to it. It's not pushing information up to the animal. Let's go back to JGrasp here in our animal laboratory 3. Next, we're going to create another class called carnivore. Let's pull that up and check it out. We are now going to program the carnivore class. So carnivore extends, inherits animal. Okay, so carnivore extends off animal. And let me move my console down so you can see a little bit more. And it's going to take me scrolling through for you to be able to see this. So you might want to pause it, program all the way down. Notice the scope of our class here. Okay, this is going all the way down to line 47. You look down here at the very bottom, there's a red dash underneath line 33, and then that shows 47. That shows me that the closing curly brace for the opening brace up here of the class is down line 47. So you know that we're going to scroll down a little bit. And go ahead and pause, then you can type that up, then we'll walk through it. I'm going to scroll down, scrolling, we're scrolling, we're not scrolling, we're just talking. And from line 33 down to 47, that would be the remainder of what you need to pause and type up. Okay, let's go back up here and let's walk through this bad boy, or bad girl, or bad program, or bad carnivore. Yeah, okay. Okay, we're using protected variable types of string, which is favorite mill. Then we have another one called biome. If you don't know what biome is, I really don't know either. Okay, but a biome is basically a bunch of ecosystems. I wasn't a biology major, or is that in the field of biology? I'm pretty sure it is. Okay, however, I do know something about biomes. We're going to use them in this lab. So public carnivore, that's our default constructor right here. Now this is interesting. What we're doing is we're calling super. Now I told you before we didn't have to do so. However, in this case, I'm going to put it there because I want to know in the back of my mind that I'm calling the super constructor to carnivore, which is an animal. Okay, so when this constructor is called super, it's going to, and it has to be the first thing you put in here. You can't put any code above this. Okay, so it's going to call animals default constructor right there. Next, I have my two variables that I created here, these two instance variables. I went ahead and assigned them default values inside of the carnivore constructor right here. Okay. Now you notice we couldn't pass the information up to animal because animal is not prepared to handle those. Okay, so we have to take care of these two variables within this class itself. Okay, that's the carnivore's responsibility. It's favorite meal and it's biome. Now we have another constructor for carnivore, and hey, you know what? That's not. There we go. Little spaces. That's annoying. So this carnivore takes in two parameters. Two string values. Those two string values are going to, I almost said feed because I saw meal, but those two string values are going to assign values to the favorite meal and the biome variables right down here on line 26 and 27. And that's all that's going to happen right there. And you'll see where we pass in those values once we get back to Animal Laboratory 3. Now right here on lines 19 through 23, I'm taking the other objects, the components that make up the animal, like the ears, the nose, the appendage, the color, and the name, and we're assigning those objects new values here inside carnivore. Okay, so we're just going to assign new values to those. Now we could have called super. Okay, we could have called super and gone with the default, but instead we're just going to assign new values to these. Now look up here. I didn't declare them up here. Okay. And I didn't pass them in as parameters. So how in the world did I get those? If you guessed, because I inherited from animal, you are correct. Okay, so I was able just to type those names in because we are the lucky carnivores, well, not, you know what I mean, that inherit these variables right here. Okay, so back to this. So that's how come we're able to just pull these variables for ears, nose, appendage, and color and assign new values without actually having to declare them at the very top. Next, we have a method here called a get method that returns a string, and we just go ahead and do it the correct way by taking each of these different class objects or components and use their get methods to return values into this string that we're going to return, so we have a nice sentence in our console that explains what kind of animal we have. And down here at the bottom we have something very interesting. We have a sets method, and this is kind of cool because the set method, we can call this method in our test class, which is Animal Laboratory. We can call this method, since it's public, and we can set a value to an object or a variable within this class. In this case, set VerbalEars, we're going to pass in a string and an integer, and we'll take those two values and pass them into the constructor for VerbalEars and assign those values to animears. Okay, now this animears value right here, okay, it does not come from right here. Okay, this animears value actually comes from right there, the one in animal. So we're able to change the information for animears using this set method here inside of our carnivore class, just by using this convention right here, or this little algorithm. Now, here's something everybody asks. Do we have to use the word set? No, these aren't keywords or anything. It's just a good methodology, and it's a good system to get used to of using get and set. Everybody kind of does it, so it's just kind of a, you know, it's a good way of communicating with your Java. In case somebody jumps in your code, they kind of immediately know what you're trying to do, because this is common in programming to set values and to get values in and out of the program. So just using get and set, it's kind of a naming convention that's ubiquitous through the entire programming universe. And have you noticed that word ubiquitous is everywhere? That's pretty interesting if you ask me. Okay, let's compile it, make sure it runs, no issues, and let's go back to Animal Laboratory 3. So here's where we have some fun. So we have our Carney super test right here, and we call the default constructor for carnivore, which will be this one right here. It calls super, which is the animal, then it assigns the two default values to these two variables. And let's go ahead and run it so we have the console output down here. Let me scroll up. There it is. So here's all the default information, and oh, don't tell me I made a mistake in this. I think I did. Good news, I didn't make a mistake. I had to pause the video. I saw this output right here, and I was thinking that it was this output, but this first output with the default information actually comes from this one right up here with the SubAnimal. Totally forgot about the SubAnimal. It happens. So down here with this one, the Carney super tester, it's calling the super value, and you can see right here where we signed favorite meal and buy on the default values. And you know what? I forgot to put my little equal symbol. So I guess I did make a mistake. If we wanted to, we come back here to carnivore and down here to the output, favorite meal, and I could put my equal symbol with the little angle brace, recompile it so everything gets updated, come back to Animal Laboratory, press clear, run it again, and we should have it. There we go. So default. And you know, I forgot a space. I'm not going to worry about that. It's just a space. We're not trying to win an award here. Okay, next one, the altered constructor test. This one passes in the two string values for the second constructor in carnivore, and it calls super. Oh, no. This one doesn't call super. This one is going to pass in two string literals, and it reassigns the values. It's this one right here. Okay, here's where we reassign the values for the carnivore by using the inherited variables from animal. And you can see the results right down here, okay, where we have all the information for a lion, and it lives in a savanna. See that? I knew the biome for a lion. Okay. And its favorite meal is a zebra. I learned that from watching The Lion Guard with my kids. Well, I don't think they eat zebras in that show. Well, maybe it was National Geographic. I can't remember. It all kind of runs into each other. Next, our third one down is our carnivore Carney Super Tester 3. And we're going to pass in these two values. So we're using the second constructor of carnivore. And this is where it gets fun. Okay, we're going to call in that set method I was telling you about. So we're going to say Carney Super Tester 3. We got to have the object name right here. And using the dot, call its method called set VerbalEars. And then we pass in the new parameters to that object that it's going to assign the values to, which is animears right down here. Okay, so that's passing the information in there, and then when we print it out, we just use the get carnivore right way method, which prints out that string literal, which is right here. You can see that it's going to print out that it has very long and pointy ears, and there's 5 ears on this particular carnivore, which would look pretty interesting if you ask me. And where'd it go? Oh, there it is, right down here. Long pointy ears and a total of 5. Okay, that is how that works. We're calling the superclass, setting some new values to objects within a inherited subclass, as well as calling the default superclass constructor by just, calling the word super right here. And assigning some new instance variables within your constructor that are dedicated to that particular type of class. Let's move on to Animal Laboratory 3 for a little bit more explanation. Did I say Animal Laboratory 3? I meant Animal Laboratory 4, the Quattro, and explain a little bit more about inheritance. All right, Animal Laboratory 4, the Quattro, this one. This is going to be our last one in this particular video tutorial. We're creating a subclass of carnivore called Space Monster. And don't get technical on me saying not all space monsters are carnivores, because, whatever. But we're just going to infer that these space monsters are carnivores. Okay? And let's go ahead and pull that up. Where's my spacemonster.java? There you are. And let's go ahead and type this up. Okay, I got some extra spacing here. I probably should delete that. No big deal. But go ahead and pause the video so you can type this up. This will go all the way down to line 53. You can see down here at the bottom of the text entry area where I'm programming, right below line 31 with the red dotted line, that tells me I'm going all the way down to line 53. So go ahead and pause so you can get all this information. Then we'll walk through this together. And I'll scroll down. We're scrolling, we're scrolling, we're scrolling, and we're stopping. And we're looking at this, and we're typing up the information. Look at that. A little space issue. Okay. Not as in Space Monster, but space as in letter space. Okay. Hopefully you paused that and got all of it now. So let's go ahead and scroll up to the top. And public Space Monster. Okay, it's going to call super. Now, which super is it going to call? Okay, Space Monster extends carnivore. Carnivore extends animal. If you remember our PowerPoint slide, okay, Space Monster is the subclass of carnivore, and carnivore is the subclass of animal. So Space Monster can access all the information in carnivore, and carnivore can access all the information in animal. Carnivore cannot access information in Space Monster. It can only access or immediately use the information from animal. Okay, remember, it flows downward. So Space Monster M, when we call super, it's immediately going to call carnivore. Let's go back to our code here and follow our calls of madness. So super is going to, whoa, wrong one. There we go, Space Monster. So Space Monster, when we call this constructor, all right, which is coming from over here, Animal Laboratory 4. You know what, I'm going to close Animal Laboratory 3. Let's just keep 4 up. So we're calling the default constructor for Space Monster to the object SP super test, and this constructor calls super, and it goes ahead and gives the assigns the value to planet, which comes from right up here. It's a string variable. When we call super, we immediately come up to carnivore. Okay, and we're calling this carnivore constructor right here. Now notice this carnivore constructor calls its super. So carnivore right here is going to call the animal. So animal gets called right here and sets all the default values for all these objects right here. Okay, and remember, spacemonster inherits all these, so it has the ability to use all these things. So whenever we run this for Animal Laboratory 4, and when we print this out, let's go ahead and check this out. Let's scroll up here. That should be the first one. There we go. Let me make this a little bit larger. Okay, so right here, it's all the default values that we assigned up here on animal. And you'll notice that we have, let's see, spacemonster had these planet, which was default. And did I not print that out? I thought I did. Maybe it's, let me find that real quick. Oh, there it is. Woo, it's been a long day, y'all. Okay, so there's the planet for this one, which is assigned right here. Okay, so remember, spacemonster calls super, which comes up to carnivore, which assigns the default values to these variables. It calls its super, which goes up to animal. And this one, the default constructor for animal, assigns all these values to these variables right here. Let's go to Animal Laboratory 4 again. And let's look at the second one. So spacemonster has another object, SP supertest 2. It assigns 3 values. Okay, so spacemonster has another constructor right here, which takes 3 string literals. We could put anything in there. I just put strings just because it's easy and it prints out real nice, and it's just easy to identify what we put in there. Unless we put the word default, then it gets kind of confusing. Okay, so we take our 3 string values coming into this particular constructor right here. Now notice right here, I take the super method and I pass in str1 and str2, which is these two happy little campers right here. Okay, so these get passed up to the super class, which is up in carnivore. str3 gets assigned to the planet variable here within spacemonster. Okay, so str1, str2 are getting passed up to the superclass of spacemonster, which is carnivore. So let's follow that. And before we go up to carnivore, let's just remember we're passing in the value humans and desert. Okay, and the word Venus got assigned to the planet variable within spacemonster. So these 2 values, humans and desert, got passed up to carnivore. And you're probably thinking, this space monster eats humans. I'm scared to death. This is scary. Okay, don't be afraid. This is not real. This is all just words for learning how to program. Okay, when we called the super from right over here with str1, str2, it went up to carnivore, and this carnivore constructor took in these 2 values, str1 and str2, or 2 parameters, excuse me. And it took those values and assigned it to the 2 instance variables of carnivore, which was favorite male and biome. Okay, so it assigned those values to those 2. And just also so you know, we could have named these anything we wanted to, but I kept the naming convention from the other constructors so that way it'd be easy to remember. All right, so str1, str2, which came from spacemonster being passed from the super right here. I switched the spacemonster right over here. Get passed up to carnivore through this constructor, and they get assigned right down here. This right here, all these variables get assigned the different values. And you just saw this in Animal Laboratory 3. Okay, and that's how Animal Laboratory 4 gets these values right here. Okay, there's Venus, favorite male humans, and the biome is desert. Okay, I always forget, is desert with 2 S's or 1? Like, I think dessert is 2 S's, which I'd rather have dessert than a desert. Animal Laboratory 4. our last one, this one's a little bit different. We're going to have an alternate constructor test with a setter. Here we're creating a new VerbalEars object called VE, and we're going to pass in the object through this spacemonster constructor to its objects, SP Super Test 3. We're going to pass in the object and 3 string parameters. So 1 object and 3 string parameters get passed into this. And then down here on line 17, we're just going to go ahead and call the get method to print out the information like we have done before. So we come back to spacemonster. Let's check out its third and final constructor. Okay, so the third and final constructor, we get VerbalEars object called VE, and then we get the 3 string literals right here. Okay, first thing we do is we take VE and we assign it to anim_ears. To change things up a little bit, I went ahead and assigned values to these objects. I didn't have to, but I went ahead and did it just so you could see that I'm inheriting all these different variables from animal. Okay, I got all these from animal, so I'm able to call them all the way down here in spacemonster. That's the only thing I wanted you to see. And I also wanted you to see that I can pass in new values through parameters to other objects. Okay, and in order to pass that object, I had to, in Animal Laboratory 4, construct a brand new object to be able to do so. If I didn't create a new object over here, I would not be able to pass it in like that. Okay, there's some ways around it, but for now, just stick with those rules. And then down here, we have our favorite meal. We pass in the string 1. And for biome and planet, we pass in str2 and str3. Now remember, the word biome and favorite meal, I believe those came from our good friend carnivore. Okay, so we're able to use these variables from carnivore down here in spacemonster because it extends from carnivore. It inherits those attributes and characteristics. Okay, so we're able to call that down here. And last but not least, nothing fancy down here with the get spacemonster method call. We're just going to print out the string literal for everything. And you can see down here where I assigned all the values to the new variables and objects and print them out down below. Okay, that pretty much wraps up the introduction to inheritance. It gets a lot more complex than just this. However, it's a good introduction to see that you can call all of the superclasses to your objects and be able to inherit those values. And quick reminder, remember, these are all components, or these are different parts of the what is now the spacemonster object. And remember our terminology right here. It's going to be called composition or components. So our spacemonster had ears, nose, appendages, and some other components I didn't list because I didn't want to make this little slide too busy. And we're able to take those different components and build them together with some additional components from other classes and to put them together to create a spacemonster. Okay, now this is all just verbal stuff, nothing super serious, but this object does contain a lot of different pieces of information that we can go and do different things with. Okay, if we were trying to make a text-based adventure game or create a database of different objects with different pieces of information, we can start doing these type of things. And we can also take this information and start feeding it into other systems once we've cleaned up some of the text and terminology and how it prints out. Okay, so this is just the beginning of much larger things taking place within programming. Hope you're having fun. Make sure you like and subscribe. Well, I hope you liked it. And I hope I didn't drink too much coffee and jump all over the place, but at least subscribe. You can have access to all these video files. I'll help you out however I can. Hope you have a great day, and thanks for watching.